We zitten klaar voor de uitzending. Het is 7 minuten geleden en er wordt hard in mijn oor geroepen: Rasmussen is de Tour uitgegooid. Nu heb ik aan de lijn Gio Lippens, collega van de NOS.
We zijn net aangekomen in het hotel van de Rabobank ploeg en daar is het de hel losgebarsten. Er staan tientallen cameraploegen hier in de hal van het hotel in de lobby.
Welk door Dante geschilderd feest zich daar afspeelt, feest tussen aanhalingstekens. Het slechte van de mens komt in 3 dagen Ronde van Frankrijk aan alle kanten naar boven.
Welcome back to the Cycling Iceberg podcast. You just heard a pretty much live reaction on Dutch television to Michael Rasmussen, the leader of the Tour de France, being withdrawn from the race by his own team, Rabobank. As the 2025 Tour de France slowly heads south, it passes through a number of places which don't carry that significant cycling history. So instead of stretching it out and trying to find a weak connection to that, we'll cover one of the darkest pages of modern Tour history, the 2007 Tour de France. The 2007 Tour de France started in a historically bad moment for cycling. The sport was covered with doping rumors. In the 1998 Tour de France, there had been a big doping scandal. That tour was dubbed Tour de Dopage. There was widespread EPO use among teams, and that got out. Well, after that, Lance Armstrong provided a much-needed rebound in terms of cycling popularity. He too was followed by a swarm of doping accusations. For most of Armstrong's career, that had just been rumors, but as his career neared an end, those rumors were getting stronger and stronger. Not only was there the book Lance Armstrong Confidential, there was also a damaging article on the front page of L'Équipe, which accused Armstrong of using doping during his career. That article in L'Équipe came just after his Tour de France win in 2005, which was his 7th and final win. That story in L'Équipe was especially damaging in France because L'Équipe belongs to the same media concern as the Tour de France itself. Historically, that paper hadn't been that critical because at the end of the day, the Tour de France was founded to boost sales of that exact newspaper. In France, that article did big damage to the reputation of Armstrong, but outside, most of it was fine. L'Équipe is a French newspaper, so it didn't gain that much traction in, say, the US, where Armstrong was still a glorified hero. What did hurt the global appeal of cycling was that in 2006, Floyd Landis, another American, won the Tour de France. It wasn't as much his win in the Tour that raised eyebrows, it was the fashion in which he did it. After an extremely bad day in which he lost several minutes, he bounced back the following day with an absurd Hail Mary attack. The way he attacked over 100 kilometers was pretty much unheard of in the modern cycling era. People questioned how clean he was, and quickly it turned out that he in fact wasn't clean. He tested positive for doping during that tour, and his win got stripped. He became the first winner of the tour to lose his title. That was of course bad press for the Tour de France, but that wasn't everything. Landis couldn't participate in 2007, but there were several other riders who couldn't start due to their involvement in another big doping case, Opération Puerto. German Jan Ullrich, who had won the Tour de France in 1997 and finished second to Armstrong numerous times, was barred from participating due to his involvement. The 2006 Giro winner, Ivan Basso, was also not allowed to participate. Meanwhile, the newspaper speculated about the involvement of several other riders. This left Astana duo Alexandre Vinokourov and Andreas Kleuden as the favourites for a race which was wide open. Other frequently tipped favourites were Christophe Moreux from AG Desert and Alejandro Valverde, at that point racing for a predecessor of Movistar. The tour began in London with a prologue of 8 kilometers. Fabian Cancellara emerged victorious and held on to the yellow jersey throughout the flat stages. During one of these stages, Vinokourov crashed. He lost over a minute on the other GC favourites already. The first real significant GC action came in stage 8, which finished at the ski resort of Tignes in the Alps. With 80 kilometers remaining, Rabobank's Michael Rasmussen attacked. Rasmussen was known as one of the world's best climbers, but was notorious for his extremely poor time trial capabilities. In the prologue, he had finished 166th. in those 8 kilometers, he had already lost nearly a minute to most GC contenders. His poor prologue was no surprise at all. In 2005, Rasmussen lost his 3rd place on the podium in the final time trial by losing over 6 minutes to his rivals. That was an absolutely disastrous time trial. In fact, Rasmussen wasn't even Rabobank's designated GC leader in 2007. That role belonged to Russian Denis Menshov. Considering this, the peloton had absolutely no problem in letting Rasmussen escape. Bridging to the breakaway, the Dane built a lead of 5 minutes. On the final climb to Tignes, Rasmussen dropped the remaining breakaway riders and secured the stage win. Far behind, the GC favourites launched multiple attacks. The young Spaniard Alberto Contador, racing for Discovery, made a particularly strong and aggressive impression, but he faded in the final kilometers. It was another Spaniard, Iban Mayo from Saunier Duval, who was the first GC rider to cross the line. Meanwhile, Vinokourov struggled. He lost significant time and wouldn't be a massive threat for the overall. Rasmussen, with his victory, also claimed the yellow jersey. He held a lead of 2 minutes 40 over Mayo and roughly 3 minutes over most other favourites. As there was still 110 kilometers of time trial remaining, his rivals were not overly concerned about his lead. The mood at Rabobank soured the following day. On this first rest day, the Danish Cycling Federation announced that they were removing Rasmussen from the national team because he had missed 2 doping tests. In an effort to clean up the sport, the UCI had introduced a whereabouts system. This system required riders to report their locations in order to receive out-of-competition doping controls. Missing 3 tests resulted in a suspension, and Rasmussen had already missed 2. Most noticeably, he had missed 1 just before the Tour. Rasmussen obviously defended himself. He claimed he was training in Mexico before the Tour, but he had forgotten in this new system to update his location, and once he did it, it was already too late. However, the damage was already done, and every day new stories emerged in the media. The most notable came from a friend of Rasmussen. He claimed he had smuggled a blood bag to him in a shoebox. Despite all the controversy, Rasmussen defended his yellow jersey spectacularly, both on and off the bike. Against expectations, he delivered a strong performance in the time trial and even overtook Valverde on the road. Overtaking the man who is second in GC is always good for your GC position. The Dane finished 11th in the stage, retaining the yellow jersey with a 1-minute lead over Cadel Evans, who raced for Lotto at this point in his career. This edition of the Tour progressed clockwise, meaning that after the Alps came the Pyrenees. In the Pyrenees, Contador emerged as Rasmussen's only competitor. On the climb to Plateau de Baye, the Spaniard was the only rider able to follow Rasmussen's attack. Contador won the stage, moving to second in GC after Evans lost 2 minutes. The next day, Contador launched multiple attacks on the final climb, but Rasmussen managed to stick with him. Heading into the second rest day, Rasmussen led the GC by 2 minutes and 23 seconds over Contador. Evans at this point was 4 minutes down. While Rasmussen seemed to solidify his position as best rider in the race, his position off the bike became very fragile. Rumors about his whereabouts continued to circulate in the papers. Many journalists suspected he had not been training in Mexico. Rather, he was in Italy. The rumors went so far that the ASO required Rasmussen to hold a press conference on the second rest day. Here he would need to face reporters asking questions about these allegations. The ASO sent warnings to Rabobank that Rasmussen would be removed from the race by them if his answers weren't deemed to be convincing. Rasmussen didn't have a spectacular personality. He didn't have much charisma, if you want to put it that way. He was tall, super skinny, he was very pale, bald. He didn't come across as a very likable person. He had also been known as this guy from the marginal gains. It was known that he went to extreme ways, taking off minuscule parts of his bike in order to save weight. That also showed in that press conference. He didn't come across convincing, further reinforcing the narrative around him that he was a bit awkward of a person. The answers given by Rasmussen weren't very convincing. He again attributed the issue to an administrative error, but he sounded very insecure. Nevertheless, he was allowed to stay in the race, not at the least because Vinokourov had failed a doping test and was kicked out of the race. The Tour couldn't have two of their superstars going home at once. They decided to just hope for the best. After the rest day, the final mountain stage awaited. Rasmussen had one of the best days of his career. After tremendous work by his Rabobank team, he toyed with Contador on the final climb. When the Spaniard attacked, Rasmussen allowed a gap to form. He made exaggerated pain faces, knowing these would be seen in the team car. He knew that they would radio to Contador that Rasmussen was hurting, but he effortlessly closed the gap. In the final kilometer, he attacked decisively and won the stage on the Aubisque. With a 3-minute lead, he seemed to have taken a decisive step towards winning the Tour, even with the final time trial remaining. Rasmussen and Rabobank were on cloud 9, but what they didn't know was that his lie about where he had been training had been exposed during this stage. Italian commentator David Cassani had seen Rasmussen training in Italy at a time when he was supposed to be in Mexico. This led to a very peculiar situation. The Rabobank team bus was making its way down the Aubisque. In the bus were all riders except Rasmussen, who was still on the top. They were partying in the bus, drinking beer, celebrating what they thought was the crown of their domestique careers. They were going to win the Tour de France as a team. Rasmussen, meanwhile, was still on top of the Aubisque. He was waiting for the helicopter to take him down once he was finished with all the obligatory things he needed to do. Go to the podium, anti-doping, give some signatures to the fans, give interviews. There were a lot of things that he needed to do. But when he was up there, he got a phone call from the general manager of the team, Theo de Rooij. De Rooij had been informed about what Cassani had said on the Italian TV. He asked Rasmussen to confirm this. Rasmussen, thinking his team would be on board, confirmed to de Rooij that he was indeed in Italy rather than Mexico. This put de Rooij in a very tricky position. He, as team manager, knew that there was widespread doping use in his team. In fact, a lot of the doping was team run. But, with the genie out of the bottle, what could he do? Could he keep lying and keep Rasmussen in the race? Or had Cassani forced him to withdraw the yellow jersey from the race? That evening, de Rooij came to a conclusion. There was no other way than to withdraw Rasmussen from the Tour. The Tour entered a state of chaos. All the reporters from every single TV channel, newspaper, website, they all rushed to the Rabobank hotel. The yellow jersey had left the Tour before, but it had never been doping related, let alone that a team was withdrawing its own yellow jersey. Moments before the press arrived in the lobby of Rabobank's hotel, Rasmussen was escorted to the airport in an anonymous car. He later admitted he had suicidal thoughts and even considered grabbing the wheel and steering into a truck. Rasmussen was completely devastated by Rabobank's decision. The team had been complicit to the lie. He couldn't understand why now all of a sudden they were pretending to be holier than the other teams and take him out. Dutch newspaper NRC revealed that Rasmussen had been in contact with the team multiple times. He had even attended a team training camp when he was supposedly in Mexico. The team knew about it. In fact, they facilitated doping by providing riders with EPO and connecting them with doping doctors. Rasmussen, but also the teammates he left behind, struggled to understand why all of a sudden he was forced to take the fall alone. It wasn't even the first time that Rasmussen used this strategy. In 2005, he had also lied about training in Mexico to avoid doping controls before the Tour. Multiple people knew about this. In that same interview, Rasmussen said he failed a blood doping test in the 2005 Tour. He however said that the UCI covered this up, allowing him to stay in the race because they didn't want to damage the reputation of the Tour by expelling a podium contender. The 2007 Tour continued without Rasmussen, but with Contador in yellow. The Spaniard narrowly held on to a 1:50 lead over Evans in the final time trial, securing his first Tour de France victory by just 23 seconds. In the Netherlands, there is this TV program called Andere Tijden Sport. In this series, they go back to prominent moments in Dutch sporting history and look back at it with the people involved. One of the first episodes I saw was about this 2007 tour, in which they looked back at it with Rasmussen. At the time, I didn't fully understand the story. Doping, cycling, I wanted to stay as far away of that as possible. In the wave of doping confessions, I was really tired of, as a young cyclist, all my friends only knowing cycling for doping. Now, I can look back at it and reflect on it much better. And I find it very interesting for pretty much the reasons that I already just listed. Rabobank, as a team, knew they were cheating the system. Like a lot of the teams, they were very busy in trying to cover up doping, but making sure that for sure their top leaders and top talents would use doping in some way or form in order to compete at the highest level. Rabobank was one of the best teams in the world at that point. That the team decided to pull Rasmussen from the 2007 tour was probably the right call. They came too close to the sun, the lie had become too big, and they got exposed. Still, I find it quite hypocritical the way that the team at that point shoved Rasmussen under the bus. They made it seem like he was a lone wolf operating a drugstore within Rabobank without anybody knowing. They acted surprised, and while I understand that at that point they needed to also get rid of him and fire him because he had confessed to it, the team was very much in on it. There was a team-run doping structure within Rabobank, and they knew it. So the way that they just shoved Rasmussen out without any regard for his position didn't really make much sense, in my opinion. I think they could have gone about that a bit more nuanced, because their critique on Rasmussen, their comments towards him in the papers afterwards, were really quite nasty. Of course, the team couldn't have come out and said, well, yeah, we know, we cheated the system as a whole, we all used doping. It would have meant the end of the team, which eventually came once that became clear. But still, it was just, I think, from their perspective, very hypocritical to shove him out like that when they had all been in. Sure, it was fine doping as long as it stayed covered up, but then as soon as it started to leak out, it was done. Adding to that hypocrisy is, in my opinion, also the position of the bank. Rabobank is a Dutch bank, and they were bankrolling that team. And it's been said that it was the pressure from the main office of the bank that eventually caused them to pull Rasmussen from the race. The bank has always insisted they didn't know what was going on, that they put the team at distance from the bank, but also that I find very hard to believe. Sure, maybe it's the hindsight here, but when I read the newspaper archives about that period, there was so much doping speculation going on that it's very hard to imagine that the people at the Rabobank headquarters just imagined that their team was a clean beacon in a sport which was filled with doping rumors. We'll never know what would have happened if the team hadn't pulled Rabobank from the race. Would Cassani's lie have effectively exposed him and meant that he would have been disqualified? Would the ASO have kicked him out? Personally, I don't think the ASO would have kicked him out. The fact that maybe afterwards there could have been some more conclusive evidence coming forward that he was indeed in Italy or at that team training camp when he should have been in Mexico, that's plausible. The UCI could have then disqualified him. But at the same time, with so much doping going on, so much covering up going on, and really the ASO just looking out for their own interests, and the UCI in that matter also trying to do the same, I don't really know what would have happened. Most of these doping things were related to police investigations, and I doubt the police would have investigated this one. I think the front page of L'Équipe the day after this happened clearly symbolizes the place that this story gets in the history of the Tour de France and cycling in general. Their front page read Exclu, meaning excluded. White letters against a black background. The black background was a picture of Rasmussen taken with a flash, leaving the race in the night. The front page gave a very dark image. This truly is one of the darkest pages in Tour and cycling history.